Hey, John Gilroy here. Today, an overview of the change from endpoint detection and response to extended detection and response. In other words, EDR to XDR. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest in the virtual studio is Ken Karsten, Senior Vice President of a company called Trellix, Trellix. Ken, I've been doing my homework. You guys are way bigger than I thought, aren't you?
I think we're a pretty sizable security presence, especially in the federal government. For those who aren't aware, we came together in 2021. We're the combination of McAfee and FireEye. We do about 1.2 to 1.4 billion in revenue a year globally, and we do about 400 million in the public sector.
I go to trade shows all the time. I might have walked in by a booth and I saw Trellix, and I just don't know that company, but I think it's one of these companies that is pretty well kept secret, but the people who know, and the people who don't. And the idea today is just to let the other people know, well, this is what Trellix does, and we can help a lot of people in many different areas. And what precipitated my invitation was I was at one of these silly events, and I think a general was on stage, and her name is Heather Blackwell, Brigadier General. And she said, someone asked her a question, well, how many endpoints do you have to worry about? And she said, well, just 3.2 million. This is 3.2 million. That's changing every day. And so, okay, here's your target, Ken. We're going to just move the target on you every day. So I think that's what your company does. It helps the federal government maybe maybe secure resources that aren't in their backyard and close. So that's what we'll talk about. We'll start off with what is this endpoint detection and response, and then what's the transition, and should you use both, or when to use either one? So toss to you, Ken. Give me a EDR overview.
I would be glad to do so. If you look at EDR and endpoint detection and response in today's environment, it's the next evolution, beyond endpoint protection, and the ability to detect highly evolved threats that come into the environment and the infrastructure and that are attacking, mostly in the government, from foreign adversaries. How you put that together in a super complex environment with the government, where they're dealing with assets that are remote, that are hybrid, that are classified and air-gapped, and managing all that in a world that is moved into a SaaS environment with FedRAMP, which we are FedRAMP High and Impact Level 5. It is a ton of complexity that the federal government has to deal with, and delivering something in that type of hybrid environment to secure their endpoints and their infrastructure is something we value incredibly, and driving that up towards what we'll talk about in this conversation, XDR, bringing endpoint and SOC and network and email all together for a highly integrated, secure environment that is implemented with artificial intelligence in order to make critical and quick security decisions and reduce the impact of labor resources is something that our federal government needs to do in a highly scaled methodology.
Ken, you kind of trippingly on tongue said, yeah, IL5. No, wait a minute. If I were you, I'd take off that suit, coat, and shirt and get a little T-shirt that says, hey, we're IL5. What do you think of it so far? This is, not every company down the street can do that.
It's a big deal. If you look at endpoint in general, there's only a couple providers that can say they're IL5 and deliver that type of security at the endpoint in our Department of Defense at the highest levels of compliance.
Okay, we got a rough idea, endpoint detection, then new and improved, up to 100 miles an hour. So what is the difference between, endpoint and extended detection and response? So extended means wider, or what does it mean?
Yeah, so when you think about endpoint detection and response, you're thinking about detecting something that occurs at the endpoint and then responding to it, whether that's blocking it, thwarting that foreign adversary, thwarting that threat that's evolving. XDR is taking it to the next level, where it really doesn't matter if it's endpoint, if it's on your network, if it's in your cloud environment, if it's coming through your email. It's integrating all of that together into a centralized response mechanism that is highly architected and integrated throughout your ecosystem. So our solution, for example, our XDR solution, Helix, integrates with over 700 different security providers to enable a process to to walk through and digest all of the data and events that are occurring in your infrastructure. So that's the detection part, and then respond to those events. So if that response mechanism is something beyond that, what has to take place on the endpoint, it can take place in your network intrusion protection systems, your NDR system, your network detection and response systems, your email protection systems, your cloud and cloud security components. So it enables a broader scope to the overall architecture and infrastructure of your environment.
Okay, let me try to paint the picture. So back in the day, endpoint detection was pretty impressive, but now with this proliferation of clouds and alt clouds and GPU clouds and here and there, and I never thought of connecting to applications, endpoint servers, and the network itself. It leads into the discussion of I think it leads to zero trust, doesn't it? It's just like, well, what does zero trust want? Well, we have to take visibility and then lock down that scoundrel Ken from getting in. How do you know where he's? And so it kind of feeds zero trust, doesn't it?
It does exactly feed zero trust. There's several pillars of what our capabilities are inside of our portfolio that deliver to the zero trust framework, whether that framework is what was put together or has been put together in the Department of Defense, DISA, and the Pentagon, or it's what's coming out of Homeland Security and CISA. We cover many of those pillars. We also have a tremendous number of partners who fulfill the other pillars, and ultimately it's all predicated on identity to start with, and then it goes into the other categories of protection, whether it be encryption or data loss prevention or endpoint detection and response, and so on and so on. And how do you integrate all those parts together to create an extremely comprehensive security environment that delivers lower cost or higher efficiency?
So I got up early this morning and I fired up my little YouTube browser and I typed in Trellix with an X. And this guy named David Graziano came up and listened to his interview. Now, he said something it's really good. Everyone knows there's pillars. There's 7 pillars for this, and they have 6 pillars, and Ken has 5 pillars, and ZTA has a bunch of different pillars. The pillars always start with identity. But what he says is that, the biggest challenge is the data pillar. And this whole idea of data loss prevention, which you just said, he said, that's the challenge. I mean, those are the golden eggs there, huh? So it seems to be a strength of Trellix, huh?
It's a huge strength of Trellix, and if you look at our capabilities in the environment, in the security ecosystem, we're one of the largest providers of data loss prevention, or DLP, in the industry, and that goes on at the endpoint network in the cloud. If you break down your infrastructure and you started out with the EPP and EDR and protecting that endpoint, how do you protect the data that is at the endpoint? Or for all intents and purposes, how do you protect your sensitive and critical data that sits anywhere in your environment and in your infrastructure, regardless of the platform that it sits on? So that is one of the focuses that we've put forward. David Graziano, he's our vice president of civilian. One of the things he's been super focused on is our CDM compliancy, our PAC compliancy with our endpoint tools, with our EDR, and how that integrates with all of the .gov and feeds back into CISA, as well as delivering that at a FedRAMP High model with a capability that also adds on forensics and forensics tools that are more leveraged by the .gov user, by the Department of Homeland Security and CISA. And we're trying to deliver that in this environment of this administration at a much lower cost. So what we're driving, and you're seeing some of this with GSA today, how they're driving bigger agreements with larger OEMs at a higher discount rate. We're doing the same with CDM, and we're also looking at doing the same with GSA.
Wait, I'm going to put lower cost in the title for this interview because that seems to be the phrase that pays in this town: efficiency and lower cost. Maybe the title will be Trellix: efficiency, lower cost. So
not to interrupt, but I think what we're trying to accomplish in the civilian government is deliver EPP, deliver EDR, add on our Helix XDR component, and drive our artificial intelligence within that at an IL5 at a FedRAMP High level, and do that at half the cost our customers are paying today just for EDR. That's what we're trying to do.
So CDM, the C, and we put the C in CDM. The CDM is continuous, and that's nice to say. Yeah, but wait a minute. I mean, this is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, everywhere in the world. Okay, so how do you adapt to the new threat? Because here it is, May, June. There could be something. I don't know what's going to be middle of June. Something could happen. So it's not just set it and forget it and then go fishing. It's like, oh, wait a minute. There's the stuff that's changing, and you got to adapt to the new change. I think that's the challenge. I think it's like, well, yeah, you got the certification. So what? It's just it's coming at you, Ken. It's coming, isn't it?
Yeah, how you mitigate the next threat or whatever's coming over the next threat spectrum is always top of mind, hopefully for every security provider, especially for us that covers so large a portfolio of the endpoint, the network, the SOC, the cloud environment, email. It's important that we look at different technologies and capabilities at every level. There's legacy signature-based stuff that everybody uses to some capacity as much as we sometimes think that's useless. There's heuristics, there's machine learning, there's artificial intelligence, there's LLM that we're leveraging in that artificial intelligence to not just look and make decisions, but also move forward with those decisions. So you've got to be able to incorporate all of that into your different technologies.
Ken, there are people who listen to this podcast when they're washing their car, they're at the gym, I don't know where they're half the things, and they want to get more information. I spelled your company name Trellix once before. Now, there may be something that they may want to download. I think you have a threat report a couple times a year. Is that right? Now, that'd be a nice, put a pin in that and download it to learn more. So what's that all about?
So you're right, exactly right. So twice a year we do come out with a threat report. It really is about targeting what the latest threats are globally that are impacting critical infrastructure, our different private sectors and government, and what are the best practices in order to protect against those critical threats.
What I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes to download the Cyber Threat Report, April 2025. Download it, maybe get an idea. The next time you see Trellix at a trade show, cruise by. If you're at the AWS public sector with 26,000 other people and you want to do that, I'll be down there. I listen to different podcasts. And so there's a podcast I listen to called Feds at the Edge. It sounds like you should be a guest on that podcast. Great podcast, Feds at the Edge. I think Fed Insider puts it out. And I listen to it every week. And I see trends. And I think that this trend I see popping up is OT. No one talked about OT 5 years ago. No one. IoT and these threats that no one ever assumed at the edge, huh? And so this fits into the Trellix discussion. It's like, well, we didn't. Oh yeah, we've been doing that for 5 years. Well, wait a minute, no one talked about that threat from 5 years. So what about how do you handle these operational OT and IoT threats that they're apparently are everywhere and coming in?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So there's a few different ways we tackle that. One is through our OEM business, where we work with companies such as Honeywell, where they embed our technologies during the production of their technologies in order to protect them. Same with bank machines, teller machines, where our technologies are embedded in there in order to ensure that we're mitigating any threats that may try to compromise those types of operating systems and those types of devices. Another way we do it is with technologies on the network. Our NDR, our network defense and response solutions, not only do they encompass things like sandboxing and intrusion protection, they also have the ability to look at threats targeted at your OT or IoT environment and block those threats. Because a lot of environments, they have these legacy systems out there. They're unable to put new software security tools or mechanisms on there to protect them. And you have to find another way to either segment or protect those devices. So those are just some of the things that we're doing. We're also using our artificial intelligence, WISE, in order to integrate all the information we're seeing from the different devices that we've deployed, whether it's endpoint, network, or cloud, to see any activity going on that are specifically targeting towards legacy types of IT or OT and IoT types of systems. So we're trying to pull all that together, and then it also feeds into our XDR platform for you or our customer to better make security decisions in their environment.
I had a silly open and talked about extended and how far does it go and down the street. Last week, I sat down with a company and we talked about 5G and satellites, satellite transmission, integrate satellites with ground stations, virtual satellite technology. And well, guess what? It extends to satellites now, buddy, whether you like it or not. It's like, well, I want 5G. Now when you see these, depictions, these graphical depictions of 5G, there's a satellite in there. And so, hey, this is another point to worry about, isn't it?
It is. We do a lot of business and, there's Space Force, there's other components of our federal government that are doing satellites and space defense. And I'm very proud to say that our products and technology are protecting systems that are in satellite and orbiting the Earth today.
Constant change. The satellite isn't constant change. We know that. And I think that the threat environment we're in now isn't constant change at all. So you talked earlier about adaptive threat protection. So here, Simon Sinek says, start with why. Well, everyone's why, secure. But how? I mean, how's that accomplished? I mean, how can you keep on top of something like that? In high school, I wrestled and you get points for riding time, and so how do you get points for riding? How do you get points for riding time with this? It's coming from everywhere. And AI, by the way, bad guys using AI. It's not just you. That's just Ken sitting on an island using AI. So how do you adapt to that?
Well, you're constantly evolving the security protection capabilities that are inside the products and inside the portfolio. You're constantly looking for threat intelligence information and adding to your threat intelligence, I want to say database, but your data lake of information in order to leverage that information inside of our products to better protect our customers. But it's always evolving. They have on the foreign adversary side just as much technology and time. So a win is really staying protected on any given day. The threat is always coming, the threat is always new, and there's always more to be done in order to have a win and accomplish the protection of our security environment and our critical infrastructure.
Well, I think you've given our listeners a pretty good idea what Trellix is all about. And if they want to contact you, I will put a link in the show notes to this. But Trellix, I mean, I think it's going to be a surprise for several listeners because maybe your presence hasn't been strong in the federal government. Maybe they confuse you with other companies, but it's a kind of a fascinating topic. It's something that's coming on the horizon. Feds on the edge. I mean, this is edge. People are now talking about in the battlefield doing compute at the edge. Yeah. And well, what about that endpoint? Well, you got to call count. Well, there's an endpoint there, isn't there?
And we protect millions of endpoints in the federal government, civilian, DoD, intelligence, network technologies, cloud security technologies, email protection. So, we're glad and proud to support our federal government customers. We're excited to do it in this environment where there's a ton of cost cutting and looking for greater efficiencies.
Yeah, that's the title, efficiency. Well, thank you very much for your time here, Ken. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Ken Karsten, Senior Vice President at Trellix, Trellix.
Thank you, John.